Okay, Scott, we're live. Thanks for joining the podcast. I'll give the floor to you, as I typically do with my guests, so you can go ahead and introduce yourself. I know we're going to get into kind of conversational AI and how you can use that in marketing and how small
Mhm.
businesses can use that. So I'm curious, maybe we could start about how you learned about this topic and how you've kind of developed the expertise to be considered someone that can advise businesses on AI and conversational AI.
Sure. Well, thank you, Connor, for having me. I really appreciate you having me on and let me share this with your audience. A little bit of background on me. My name's Scott Westwater. I'm one of the co-founders for Pragmatic Digital. My wife and I co-founded Pragmatic back in 2017. And ultimately, what we try to do is help clients understand where AI fits in their marketing ecosystem, and then ultimately how they can actually use it to make things more efficient, help your customers out in a self-service manner. There's a bunch of different things that we can do, but ultimately it's about demystifying the technology so it's more approachable. A lot of folks like to talk in either theory or in like high science, and we want to try to break it down and become a little bit more practical. So I got my start in AI about 7-ish years ago. And it was really, believe it or not, Gary Vaynerchuk back in 2016, 15, 16, 17 was talking a lot about voice and Amazon Alexa and how that's going to be a big thing to consider moving forward. And so I started looking into the data myself, and my background's in user experience. So I'm used to doing research. I'm used to kind of seeing these technology shifts. And so when I started looking into the data, I saw something that seemed very similar to me, like the early days of mobile, the early days of social, and even the early days of the web. My career started back in that era. So kind of seeing this progression happen 3 different other times in my career, I was like, all right, let's focus on artificial intelligence, voice and conversational AI, and see if we can actually help customers and clients figure out where this all fits. So ultimately, that was our start. And I actually got a chance to meet Gary Vaynerchuk at VoiceCon. It was the first one that he did. And yeah, it was just a really great experience. And then started going to a lot of voice conferences and a lot of AI conferences. First few that we did, we kind of observed and just kind of learned a lot. But then we started becoming speakers. So we do public speaking on the topic. We do consult with brands and businesses. We also do workshops. And so ultimately, it's just trying to help people figure out what this technology can even do, how it can help make things more efficient, especially processes they're already doing. I think one of the big mistakes that a lot of people make is try to do something that's way too far advanced, either for the organization or for their customer base. So we ultimately try to figure out where that sweet spot is so we can get you started now and then evolve over time. So you end up hitting that feature state a year down the road, 2 years down the road, et cetera.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful, and I'm curious, because you kind of brought it up, you started on this journey researching this stuff all the way back in 2016. I think you said it
Yeah,
was for
yeah,
7 years. So maybe, right, for me recently, I mean, it seems like the last year or maybe even 2 years, it's just
sure.
gone bonkers with AI this, AI that. So
Yep.
um, how do you define AI for the audience? And you mentioned Alexa. And
Hmm.
I mean, now that I think about it, I previously, like in 2016, 2017, I never thought of Alexa or Siri as AI, but
It
maybe you can
is.
help kind of set the stage. Okay. So how
Yeah.
do you define that? And then how can people define that, everyday people or everyday small business owners define that to know what fits into that category?
So, artificial intelligence is a huge umbrella term, and there's a bunch of different pieces that kind of fall underneath it. So, there's predictive, there's conversational, there's machine learning, there's voice recognition, there's image recognition. There's a lot of different pieces that kind of fall underneath that banner. But ultimately, what you should know as a business owner is there are technologies that exist to help streamline or make things more efficient. So, for instance, if you're looking for customers, there are AI tools that actually can help you prospect, find your target audience, and then even do some outreach to them. You can also go through and use it to do some task work that you normally have. So there's a tool that I've been using for the past, I think, about 3.5-ish weeks called Lindy.ai. And they have done an incredible job of giving me the opportunity to find those really difficult or time consuming tasks in my day. Using their system, I'm actually able to streamline it. So something that would normally take let's say 10, 15 hours to do, I can do it in 25 to 30 minutes. And so that could be coming up with a specific part of a strategy. That could be cold outreach and kind of the email sequence. It could be a bunch of different things. But ultimately, my big thing is if you run into a possible opportunity where you can streamline or automate, try it and see if it works. And it probably is not going to work on that first time through, especially if you're relatively new to artificial intelligence or prompting. Prompting being basically spoken or typed words in English language to give the computer direction. So if you're kind of new to it, it might take a little bit of trial and error. But for instance, last year, like I said, my wife and I are public speakers. So last year we were looking for a bunch of marketing conferences to speak at. And it took me about 10, 12 hours to find a bunch of different ones that we can, apply to speak at and blah, blah, blah. Using Lindy. And once I had the prompt set up properly, it basically went out and did the research for me and put all the results into a Google Sheet for me. And I actually had the conference URL, the city, the dates that they were actually happening, and any other relevant information. So like something that would normally take me 10 to 15-ish hours was like less than 30 minutes. So for me, that's a huge time savings. We're still considered a small business. We have a few employees that work with us, but ultimately we're still a really small team. So we have to kind of act bigger than we really are in some regards. And tools like that actually help me do it because I don't have to spend 60 to 80 hours working on my business. I can spend 20 to 30 to 40 working on my business. So I always look for opportunities to really streamline things and ultimately try to make things as efficient as possible so I can focus on the things that are meaningful.
And how did you find that tool specifically, right? And this is something I wanted to get into as well. Is
Yeah.
This like there's hundreds of tools out there. Okay,
Yeah.
but once you kind of understand the basics and say, okay, this could really help me. This could help automate
Yeah.
things, make me more efficient. But still, how do you find the right tool and know that it's going to have those efficiencies like Lindy did for you?
Honestly, it's just a lot of trial and error. It's some research on Twitter. People will either promote their own platforms or other people talk about it. And so that's actually how I found Lindy. Someone else was actually talking about it. But there's another platform that I have used and actually love for SEO. It's called PostCheetah. I actually found out about that because their CEO was tweeting a lot about, various topics related to AI, but then also talking about how they've created this SEO platform. So a lot of what I will end up doing is once I hear about something like that, especially if there's like a wait list, I'll join the wait list and then I'll probably even forget about it. And then like 2 to 3 months later, I'll get an email that says you're in. And I'm like, I'm in for what? So it'll take me a second to remember, but ultimately, that's Twitter's a great place to do it. There's also a lot of newsletters that you can subscribe to. There's blog posts, things like that, where people are talking about various tools and techniques that exist. Product Hunt is actually another great resource, and actually both of the tools that I've mentioned so far have been featured on Product Hunt recently. That's also where a lot of early stage founders promote their tools, and it doesn't have to be AI; it could be just technology in general. But those are some of the places that I look, and then using tools like Perplexity and other AI tools that exist to do deeper research into stuff. Is ultimately kind of where I spend most of my time when I'm doing kind of the seeking out information and trying to find new tools to address a specific issue.
And you mentioned it a bit there, right? That on Product Hunt, for example, there are tools that are not AI based. And this is something else I wanted to ask you about is how many products and companies now are kind of, it seems that they jump on the AI bandwagon. They're saying, okay, our offering is now infused with AI. So how much of it is actually, okay, yeah, they are truly integrating some of this technology into it, other versus, hey, we're just jumping on the bandwagon and we're going to say it's AI based when it's really not. How do you differentiate between those two things?
You have to evaluate it and really see ultimately what it's doing. There are plenty of platforms that are legacy platforms that have integrated some level of AI into it. Now, whether it's true AI or not, that's a whole different thing. But at the end of the day, in my opinion, as long as whatever they've added makes you more efficient or more capable, it's okay if it's not like true AI. People are talking about artificial general intelligence and all kinds of like, a little bit more sci-fi things, which quite frankly, we're probably about a year out, year and a half out from some of that happening. But there's still tons you can actually do right now. So whether it's real or not AI, it's ultimately, does it make it more efficient? Does it make it easier for you to do whatever? And I can't, oh, it was Adobe. I actually opened Acrobat today, and they have a beta of a summarizer for their PDF reader or their PDF tool. So like in Acrobat, it actually says, do you want to summarize this document? I'm like, when did that show up? And I hadn't seen that before. So there are companies that are consistently rolling these things out. And like you said, like there's hundreds of tools, and I would argue there's probably hundreds of tools that get announced almost every single day. And it's not just a US based thing. I actually found out about another language model coming out of France. I think it was yesterday I learned about it and never heard of them before. But Le Chat is the name of that tool. And so there's tons of people working on various parts of it, whether it's generative and, language or image generation, video generation, SEO content creation. There's someone trying to figure out all these different components, and then the big players like Salesforce, Adobe, Microsoft, Google obviously have offerings, some a little bit more capable than others at this point. But I think the big thing to remember, and I've heard Ethan Mollick mention this, I've heard Paul Rotzer mention this, the AI you're using right now is probably the worst AI you'll ever use. It's only going to get better from here. So like thinking about that, like if you're having success already, like you're just going to continue to see more and more success in the future. And that doesn't even, talk about conversational AI or the chatbots or voice assistants that, either as an individual or an entrepreneur you can deploy, or as a brand you can deploy to help customers get information faster 24/7. So like there's tons of different applications of the technology. It's really about figuring out where is your biggest challenge right now, and are there tools that can help solve that challenge.
And how do you keep pace with that rapid amount of change, right? You mentioned Lindy as a tool, or these other tools that you're using, and how do you know that they're not already obsolete in a month, or that there's something new that you need to learn? I mean, how do you balance that? Which I think is a good thing that it's progressing quickly, but I feel like small business owners, we're going to have fatigue with this stuff as it continues to progress.
Well, the nice thing about a lot of the systems or a lot of the tools that exist is they're actually based on prompting or just typing in regular written language. And so if you can actually, and this is kind of my experience, I liken it to giving feedback. So if you're a creative director and you're giving feedback to someone, or a client, you're giving feedback to someone, it's really prompting the AI system to do what you're asking it to do. So the better the description, the more detail that you provide, the better the response. And I would say 60 to 70% of the tools that exist now are starting to adopt that type of a model where you either type or speak a command and then it'll go out and do it for you. So there's less of a barrier because you don't have to learn programming. You don't have to learn the interface. It's more of, here's what I would like you to do. And then if it doesn't do it, then you can actually say, no, that's not what I was looking for. I'm looking for something like this. So like I find a lot of times with either ChatGPT or Lindy or any of the other tools that I use, I'm actually having a back and forth. So it's not just a, prompt and then kind of walk away, grab a cup of coffee. It's, no, I didn't quite mean that, or I actually intended for you to do this. And there's a lot more dialogue and back and forth. And then the end result ends up being really, really good. But it's not just accepting what it gives you on that first kind of pass, unless it's what you're looking for.
And how could someone learn how to write really efficient prompts, right? I think, is that where you can differentiate yourself with AI? Yeah.
So
So maybe
there
we could speak to that a bit.
people that are considered prompt engineers, and their job is effectively to come up with whatever that prompt you would feed an AI system. I had a meeting about a month ago with someone who basically said he was working on one prompt for 24 hours, and I don't even remember how many pages long it was, but they were trying to do some data analysis for a client, and it was just a massive prompt that they actually had to do in order to get it to give the right output. So, it really kind of depends on the specific scenario that you're trying to accomplish, or the task you're trying to accomplish. But There is a guy on Twitter, his name's Brian Romilly. I highly recommend, Connor, you and then everyone that's listening to this, find him and follow him. He's one of the most fascinating people I've ever actually had the opportunity to meet. But he actually has what he calls a super prompt. And so he basically has kind of created this methodology for creating these robust prompts. And one of those super prompts that he created was actually a super prompt to create prompts, which is kind of meta. But ultimately, what it is you say, here's your instructions. If you understand it, say okay. And then ChatGPT says, okay, what would you like this prompt to be about? And then it starts asking you a series of questions back and forth. And every time you give it more input, it actually will score, give you a grade on the prompt. So like, you don't necessarily have to know exactly how to build it, but using that kind of question and answer system, the system will actually help build it for you, which I have found to become incredibly efficient. And the results are way more robust doing it that route than if you were to just sit there and, type a couple sentences in and then cross your fingers that you're getting a good result.
Can we maybe focus on prompts for like marketing specifically and kind of what you help people with? Does it need to get unnecessarily complex in that regard, or is it relatively simple?
I mean, it really, at the end of the day, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So, if you're trying to do a cold outreach sequence, it could be something like, I need you to help me to create a 3-message cold outreach sequence. In the first message, I want you to introduce me. In the second one, I want you to do X. And the next one, I want you to do Y. And then, infuse personality into it by, interjecting quips and things like whatever you want it to do. And so basically giving that kind of a prompt, ChatGPT would then generate you 3, outbound messages that you could actually send to people. Or if you're using something like ConvertKit or any of the other CRM platforms, you can actually have someone download your lead magnet and then automatically get those sequences. So from a content creation standpoint, it's certainly helpful, especially if you're not a copywriter by trade. I find myself using it a lot for editorial, a lot for brainstorming, and quite frankly, a lot to like clean up some of the thoughts that I have. But then I'm also using Grammarly and other, grammar tools, things like that to help really polish what I'm saying. So like that's one example, but you can also, I actually used ChatGPT pretty early on and fed it a bunch of consumer research that I had found and basically created a virtual avatar that I could actually interact with. And so I could actually ask it to critique my blog post on topic X, or if you were to get this type of an email, how would you react to it? And so it's not 100% accurate or 100% authentic because it's not really a human. But because it has its own data set, and then if you're able to add additional things to the data set, you can actually get some pretty incredible results pretty quickly. So those are a couple of the ways. And I mean, I've used it for a lot of different things. So those are the couple of things that kind of pop into my head right now.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious the receptibility, like if with your company, when you're reaching out to smaller businesses, how receptive people are to embracing this technology versus people that are saying, oh, no thanks, I'm good. This is too much for me to handle. I mean, what's the combination there?
And it's honestly not even small business owners. It's big brands that are saying the same thing. A lot of people, especially around kind of the marketing sphere, they're like, I know I need to pay attention to this, but I don't know what that means. So like a lot of people just need help with education right now, trying to figure out like what's even possible. And I think a lot of the challenges you see, a lot of the talking heads talking about things that are probably out of reach for most businesses or most brands right now, unless they're, a big organization that has millions of dollars to invest. But again, like I said, some of these tools that I mentioned, like 40, $50 a month, certainly approachable for a small business owner, especially if you are struggling with, either content generation or, really anything within your business. Like there's, one of the use cases for Lindy is like call center avoidance. So like being able to access help docs via, Lindy, or like internal being able to answer questions via Slack bot. And if you can't answer the question, then it would actually send a message to someone that actually can answer it for you. So there's like those types of applications that, again, for a relatively low price, you'd be able to start implementing within your organization. But again, it's really at this point, and it's really been true for the past 5 years. It's about education and really helping people identify like what's even possible, what my customers are comfortable doing right now. My wife and I have actually conducted research a few years in a row where we have a pretty good handle on the behaviors and the tasks that people want to accomplish when it comes to conversational AI and their voice. So we've got a lot of consumer data, and there's a huge amount of interest and demand amongst the consumer population. A lot of brands aren't still providing that information in a relevant way. So that is an opportunity for brands, companies big and small. And then when you start thinking about search, like if you're not optimizing for long tail search as opposed to keywords, you're missing out on a huge opportunity because only about a third or so of the websites are optimized for both. And so if you're a smaller player, you can actually start to get those more robust phrases, those questions that people have. And if your answer shows up, either in one of these AI systems on Alexa or even on, search, traditional Google search, you win. So like those are like some of the things I always tell small businesses. Like if you don't have a Google My Business page, do that. That's one of the first things you can do. And I actually met someone who was running an agency in Florida, and he had a local pest control client. And when they enabled Google My Business, they went from like 35 inbound leads a week to 700. And so just by enabling it, and then when someone asked, find a pest control company around me, they were coming up because they had the Google My Business page set up. They were actually ranking for those specific questions that people are looking for. So like for a lot of your listeners, that is going to be a huge, if you're not doing that, start there and then kind of start to add some of these additional things in if you're looking for more inbound leads.
And then I'm curious, like if you think a couple years out, like what about you brought up that pest control. I think that's a great example. What about like other small businesses that do flat out refuse? They say, okay, I'm not embracing this technology. I mean, do you see businesses that will still exist and thrive in 5 years if they're not using this? Or is this going to be as ubiquitous as having a website or being listed on Google, like you just talked about? Is that kind of where we're headed with this as time progresses?
I don't necessarily think that you'll have to go down that path to be in business, but I think it's going to be much more difficult to be competitive, especially if your competitors are starting to embrace the technology. One of the industries we work with is restaurants. And so one of the big issues is staffing and then also being able to cover the phones if they're doing phone ordering. So like there's a company we work with called Voicify that's built a platform that you can actually use it to answer phones, and it's automated. It'll answer, the 50 or so common questions that they always get, but also allow them to take orders that way. So that frees people up to actually focus on preparing the food and also, doing great customer service. Whereas it also helps reduce errors. Humans, when they're writing things down really fast, it's hectic in a restaurant, might make an error. So like it also helps cut down on the amount of errors. Plus, then you can have, multiple conversations happening at once. So you're able to take more orders. So like that's another great way that a small business, especially in that specific industry, can leverage conversational AI to start to lessen some of the burden when it comes to staffing shortages and food prices going up and all the pressures that they're under. Restaurants are really getting hammered right now when it comes to that. So anything we can do to augment and not replace, but augment and work with their existing employees is definitely the right approach.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think the goal of all this, right, is to help and not, hurt a business, right? It seems like, it could just be overwhelming, but the goal is to help, right? To make things more efficient, to make things easier, to help people at the end of the day make more money, provide a better product to their customers, right?
Yeah.
So is that something you need to emphasize? Is that something that, with all this research, all these tools that you use, does it sometimes seem like it gets lost in the shuffle, or do you see that as still as kind of like your North Star?
I mean, that's certainly my North Star. That's my wife's North Star. Like we've been in business for 25 years, not as pragmatic, but just as professionals and practitioners. And so we understand the concerns of the business side, but also with our UX background, really can understand customers. And so, yeah, it's about helping and not trying to replace or like, get rid of human operators, humans, at working with these things, you need to be the human in the loop. So our big thing is AI plus human, not AI or human. So like with a big call center, for instance, if I can go through and call, get an answer to my question within 30 seconds because it's automated, I win because I got my information. The brand wins because they don't have to pay to actually have someone answer the phone. And some of those things are $2, $3, $4 a minute. So like it's an efficiency play. And I actually just saw a case study this morning where it was something like 700 employees worth of conversations were had in a month of this one specific client using a conversational, I think it was a chat bot actually, but regardless, like they were able to handle 700 people's worth of conversation in that month, which also frees up the real humans to answer the more difficult, time consuming issues. So like you can answer basic stuff and then hand it off to a human. Ultimately, you're giving better customer service because people aren't waiting as long to get help with their questions. And if it's something that can be automated and just handled there, great, off to the races. So
Don't these efficiencies, though, and this is kind of general, don't these efficiencies generally lend to, okay, yes, we're still going to employ people, but it may require fewer people? I mean, is that not an inevitability of these technologies? I mean, if you think about it, maybe it's a marketing communications person that writes memos and blog posts, and now they can have 5 blog posts done in a day that would have taken 2 weeks. I mean, doesn't that kind of, why as a business owner are you going to pay 5 people when you can just pay 2, right? I don't know how you handle that as well or deal with that, or if you agree or disagree. I don't know.
I know there's a tendency to think that at first. And I have heard of companies that have fired their marketing or communication staff because they're able to use ChatGPT instead of whatever. But at the end of the day, the results are always going to be better when it's human plus machine versus just the machine, by itself. The other part of it is, especially in the case with call center folks, they're the ones that are answering the phones. They know the questions that get asked all the time. So they're perfect to actually be AI trainers and help train those models so that they are answering the things properly every single time. So it will require some upskilling and shifting people around. But ultimately, the goal should not be to replace humans with a bunch of machines. In the research we've done, and there was actually a charity that we were doing work with, when we had mentioned just the idea of using, an AI assistant, they're like, but if you take away my human and I can't call the people that I've grown to trust, especially given my circumstance, I'm going to be very upset. And we're like, no, that's not what we're here to do. We want to understand what can we automate, what things can we help you just get quick answers. And then you can still call and still chat with the same people that you always chat with. But I think that's a nice cautionary tale for anyone that out there that wants to go, now let's just automate it all. Let's get rid of all the humans that are working on the stuff. Ultimately, you're just not going to be as successful as if you actually have people that care about your company, that understand your company, understand your customers, and actually are working with these AI systems to produce content or, do whatever they need to do.
And isn't a big part of it too, is if you are, I don't know if replacing is the best word, but making it more efficient for a call center, right? And therefore it lowers the cost of the insurance company to offer customer service to their customers, which in turn should bring costs down, which should lower the cost of purchasing insurance from this insurance company, right? Is that how you think about this as well? Because that's what I think about in terms of like AI and efficiencies, is the lowering cost portion, which should also benefit the consumer theoretically, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're an insurance company and you're not doing that, but your competition is, and therefore they're undercutting you on price, it kind of is like this race to zero of who can offer the best insurance, in this example, the lowest price. I mean, do you think about that at all? Or like if you are a restaurant and you say, okay, I provide this amazing food, and because I'm using all these systems, I can offer it for 10% less than the competition. Right. So I know it's already a really high quality product and I can offer it for less. I don't know if that's the thinking at all.
So a lot of what we do is building the business case. So sometimes it is cost reduction. Sometimes it is an efficiency play. Sometimes it's, helping to bring more customers to the machine that they've already built. So, but yeah, cost savings, and then in turn passing on that cost savings to customers is definitely part of the equation if it's appropriate. It's funny you mentioned insurance because we're actually working with a very large international insurance company right now. And a lot of their focus is in Central America, Latin America, Mexico, Spain, etc. I was actually shocked when I started auditing that industry in Spanish speaking specifically, how much more advanced they are in the adoption of AI, especially when it comes to conversational. Everyone's got a WhatsApp bot. Everyone's got a chat bot on their website. A lot of people have Amazon Alexa enabled, in the different locations and things like that. And I would say it's probably almost 3 to 1 more advanced in the Spanish speaking world than it actually is here in the US, which the first time I saw it, I was kind of shocked. But as you start digging into it, it makes a lot more sense. Those cultures tend to be way more mobile than we are on mobile device. So they're on their phone, they're talking to their phone, they're using the assistants that are already there. WhatsApp is where they communicate with all their friends. So it just makes sense to interact with brands that way. But that's something that a lot of the US brands haven't actually adopted yet. So, I would say for a mid-sized business, WhatsApp's probably relevant. For a small one, it depends on what your revenue is, but you could potentially look at creating a WhatsApp experience that ties into your website and then ultimately answers the questions that your customers have without needing to pick up a phone or having you physically answer it. Again, it's just a different way of engaging with your audience. And we're also big proponents of adding to your existing ecosystem. So it's not that like an Amazon Alexa thing would replace your mobile app, but it could work with your mobile app, or you could voice enable your mobile app. Your website's probably never going to go away. That's still going to be, a primary way for people to find out about your business. But if you can take that information and make it accessible elsewhere when people are looking for you, that's a win all around. So, those are some of the things that we consider. And there's a process that we go through to help brands figure out, here's what we need to do internally. Here's what our customers are looking at. Let's focus on the intersection first, and let's create something that's really useful and usable for both our audience and also the internal stakeholders. And then what's evolved over time. So it's kind of like I was talking about earlier, where you don't want to spend 2 or 3 years building a rocket ship. We'll get you there eventually, but let's start small. Let's get some usage. Let's see how people react or use the tool when you put it in the market, because once it's in the market, all bets are always off. And then let's adjust as we need to. So it's continuous learning and it's evolution versus trying to, just do the moonshot all at once. It's just way too much to undertake for a lot of businesses, especially still in 2024.
Yeah, and I want to kind of pivot a little bit too. Like we talked about this as the evolution of the technology. So I don't know how far in the future you look and you say, okay, I kind of think, these are the changes that are going to happen over the next year, the next 5 years. And just considering, I know you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you've been researching and working in this space since 2016. I mean, have you seen it follow a progression that you expected? So maybe we could start there. Like, did you kind of foresee a large language model like ChatGPT becoming so mainstream at this point, or is anything surprised you?
I mean, the fact that it caught as much fire as it did as early as it did was kind of surprising. But on the flip side, it made my job a lot easier because I didn't really have to start explaining from what is AI. Like people at least had that mind share and they're at least aware. So it really progressed the conversation. So when they came out in November of 22, that was a really good time for us, quite frankly, because it actually helped create more mature, more qualified customers, quite frankly. So am I surprised at the technology? Not really. Am I surprised at how many companies are jumping on the bandwagon? Yes. Am I also surprised at how many open source initiatives there are? Yeah, I'm pretty surprised and impressed, quite frankly, by that. But there's definitely, like, we're seeing a technology sea change right now. Again, Brian Romley, who I mentioned earlier, I think it was today or yesterday, he was talking about it on Twitter, where within 5 years, and he's actually saying probably later on this year, you can actually create your own app by just, sketching out a couple of drawings on a piece of paper and also giving it a prompt. And so these may be single time use apps for a specific task, which is ultimately how I'm using Lindy. But as individuals that aren't information science majors who aren't programmers by trade, we'll be able to create our own applications. And I think that's probably, I tend to agree with Brian. So like it's going to be closer in. So if it's not at the end of this year, it's going to be certainly next year. I've already seen demos of people creating interfaces like via computer vision. So you sketch something out on a piece of paper, show it to the computer's camera, and it actually codes it up for you. Like that, I've already seen that demo. So it's not too much of a stretch to think that you could also add a few prompts to it, and then you create something that you can run on your phone. Now, how that all works at some point, I don't know, but I know that's the direction of travel. So it'll become kind of a democratization of technology, whereas anyone you'd be able to create your own application versus the outlay of capital to hire developers, hire UXers, hire a bunch of other folks. So for a small business person, it's going to be great because you're going to be in control and you're going to be able to do a lot more without needing to go outside.
Yeah. So do you look at that as a mostly positive thing? I mean, do you think about any of the downsides of, basically what you described? Like I think about it too. And Sora just came out with video generation.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody can, write an essay through Chat GPT in minutes and seconds. Right? I always just think, like, isn't it just going to flood the internet with too much of this low level content or these low level applications? And I mean, does that matter? I don't know. That's the one piece, is if it becomes so easy for anyone to do it, everyone's going to do it, and then it kind of loses its meaning or its staying power. I don't know.
Honestly, I've heard that argument throughout my entire career. So like when I was in college, digital photography was in its infancy. And so I was in a photography class where one of the big camera stores here in Chicago came and showed off a $40,000 camera. It was a Kodak back. And all the photography students were absolutely against it. This is, image manipulation is going to be way too easy. All the art's going to be lost. Any hack will be able to do it. Same thing was said with cell phone photos or cameras, quite frankly. If you are a professional and if you know how to do it by adopting the technology, you're going to have a leg up on a amateur or someone that actually doesn't understand how to create. So like it was the same thing with the Mac, in the early days of design. There's plenty of examples of, oh no, this technology is just going to replace humans and it's going to be horrible, or it's going to make it so available to everyone that it's just going to be a sea of sameness. And quite frankly, that hasn't really happened. I know that's always the concern, but if you're a creative professional, the best thing you could do right now is actually start investigating how to use the technology to make your craft better. So whether it's, helping brainstorm ideas for blog articles, helping SEO optimize something you've already written, like whatever, like you're trying to do, like if you start to learn that, you're going to be much better off in 3 years than someone who hasn't, tried to figure out how to implement it within their workflow. I think the other thing, and something that you and I talked about earlier, was right now there's a lot of folks that are dabbling. So especially in mid to large size organizations. So there's like ones and twos and different departments that are kind of exploring and seeing how they can make their day more efficient. Some businesses are even incentivizing that. And if you find something that's really cool, they'll give you like a $2,000 bonus, and then you can actually teach other people how to do it. So they're actively showing or having developers try to use the technology to either write code or debug stuff. They're having designers use it for like idea generation. There's a bunch of different applications of it, but yes, there is the tendency is in the human condition to be all doom and gloom and assume that, this is going to be the worst. And I've seen Terminator, like I know how that story ends, and I'm definitely very cognizant of it. But there's a group of us through the Linux Foundation that are working on ethics and security and things that really need to be considered at this point, so we don't end up with Skynet, we don't end up with Terminator. But a lot of what we're talking about is, more practical business application, and there's a ton you can do with it right now.
So maybe you could kind of talk about that too, like from your perspective. And I think you mentioned it earlier in the conversation as well, about like kind of general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and what exactly that means, and how, if you think that the technology can get there, and if so, how, right? And you brought up a really good point too about how, hey, this is going to get crazier. You can just create apps like this, but I mean, how good can this get? Like, how far do we go? And maybe we don't even know, but
I mean,
I don't
I
know
don't think we
how
even
you think about that.
we haven't even scratched the surface. I mean, I've seen, there's the random like mashups that you'll see, like Taylor Swift singing a Metallica song. Like we've seen a lot of that stuff. And that's kind of experimentation, but I think we're starting to see some creators dabble, and we're starting to see, especially like with Adobe Firefly, some incredible visual executions that are being done via AI. Some of it's actually indistinguishable at this point from an actual, a DSLR photo. So it's going to get crazy, and the thing I worry most about is we will not know what's real and what's fake. And so, like, we already live, in a society where it's questionable what we see online, if it's true or not. And especially when you start to layer on these types of technologies with the capabilities, even in 2024, like a lot of it's indistinguishable from a genuine article. So I know there are some companies that are working on like watermarking initiatives and things like that to say it is AI generated, but it came from my platform, and here's the proof. But that's kind of one off, two off the brands that are doing that, or companies that are doing that. But yeah, the trust factor is going to be, I think, the biggest issue, because we'll see something and we won't know if it's science fiction, if it's real, if it's AI generated. And like the telltale signs of like, extra fingers on the hand or weird looking like facial expression, like those are like almost gone now. So it's going to be really hard to distinguish truth from not. And that's the thing that I actually am most concerned about. Especially just with everything that's going on in the world, like we could probably use a little bit more truth, and it's going to become harder and harder to distinguish what is and what isn't.
I mean, do you have any ideas from your perspective, like any guardrails or solutions? I mean, how do you I don't like you're Elon Musk and you own Twitter. I mean, how do you even prevent that? I just don't. I don't know how you even start.
I mean, honestly, that's a big, hairy problem that people are working on. So, like, that's a good thing. Like, there are folks working on that right now, but it's way above my pay grade, quite frankly. So,
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
technology standpoint, and how they would basically how they would either moderate it or like prove something isn't or isn't true, I truly don't know. But I think we're going to have to become better as consumers and really figure out, or at least try to figure out a little bit more what is and what isn't true, what is propaganda, what isn't propaganda, things like that. And like I said, it's so hard right now. Like I'm sure stuff we've seen for the past few years, like on Twitter, some of it's probably generated by AI and we don't even know. Like that's how good it's gotten. Or I've seen stories of, people using voice cloning tools to fake out family members, or quite frankly, big banks. I've heard stories of big banks losing 25, $50 million because someone called in with the voice of the CEO or the CFO of a company. They have all the credentials through their phishing activities, and they're able to get money from the bank. And so the flip side of that is there are software technologies that exist that will accurately print your voice. And even if your voice changes, because I guess every 18 months or so, your voice does change. To us, it's indistinguishable, but to an AI system, it is very distinguishable. They're able to match with a bunch of different data points and say if you are or not the actual person that you say you are. So like it's kind of like there's the point counterpoint. So there's technology that can be used for bad, but then there's usually something on the other side to basically ferret it out and make sure that you're not going to be susceptible to fraud. So, but when it comes to like how we're going to clamp down on it, there are groups like the Linux Foundation working on standards when it comes to like conversation and voice specifically, because that's I think where a lot of that challenge is going to end up becoming. There are groups that are working on that right now. So I guess the best way to answer that is we'll see and to be continued kind of a thing,
Yeah, all that considered, I mean, would you consider yourself optimistic for the future or
I'm incredibly
pessimistic?
optimistic. I mean, if so, like my big thing is if we screw this up, not only have we screwed it up for ourselves, but we've screwed this whole thing up for future generations. And so, like, the cool thing is we are now living in Star Wars and Star Trek and all the stuff that we grew up with as kids. Like, it's now possible. So you can talk to computers, you can interact with these AI systems and things like that. but all it's going to take is one or two missteps for, a really bad, and I can't even speculate what that would be, but a really bad outcome to then completely screw this up for not only our generation, but my son's generation, the generation after that. And so, like, as a practitioner, I kind of see it as part of my duty to make sure that we are on the up and up and we do act ethically so that we can, over time evolve these systems. Because in my opinion, we're really just beta testers of all this technology. It's going to be our kids and their kids and their kids that are going to actually benefit the most from it, because it'll become super ubiquitous at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to even comprehend 30 years into the future, right?
I mean, I can't even comprehend 5 years in the future at this point. When it, like, seriously, like, every day it seems like there's 100 new tools. Every 6 months or so, there's a pretty significant change from a lot of the big players, and so it's my job to keep up with it. So I keep up with it, but I could definitely see, as a outsider kind of looking in, feeling overwhelmed and not even knowing like what's up from down, if they just kind of try to jump in. So ultimately, that's why we're here. We're here to help people kind of navigate that, so they don't have to have all the details, and they can ultimately figure out what the problems they're trying to solve, and then we can match up the right technology for what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and maybe we can pivot a little bit too,
Yeah.
and in the latter part here of the episode, we can focus on you and your business and kind of what your goals are. And I also see the books in the background too. I kind of want to talk to you about the book
Yeah.
that you wrote, and maybe we can start there. Maybe we can start with the book, like what it is comprised of, what it took to write it, and then I'm also curious too. Just we talked about how everything's changing so fast. You put all this work into a book, pain, sweat, and tears, and
Mhm.
then in a year, so much change. So how do you reckon with that? Are you keeping the book up to date with new updates and things like that?
Not yet, but I will say that we had to rewrite the first three chapters 3 times, because it changed that much from 2020 when we started to last July when we released it. So, like, when we started, Google was still doing smart speakers and Google Actions, so the applications that run on the speakers. I think it was in 2022 they sunset the application, so the speakers still exist, but you're not able to create third-party applications now. So, like, that was a big change, and that completely caught us off guard. So we had to rewrite that part of it, and then just adding in, some of the things that have happened over the past couple of years. We were able to accomplish. But then I think it was January of 23. With ChatGPT being a big thing and generative AI being a big thing, we're like, "Hey, publisher, we need to add that," and they're like, "No, we need to get the book out." So basically, that was we were all the way up to like the big large language model kind of revolution is basically what we cover in our book. So, but yeah, it was like a 3.5 year process. A lot of research, a lot of citation. In addition to being a book, it's also a university level textbook. And so it's, cited up the wazoo. We also have 13 guest contributions from various folks in the industry. So we had someone that was in charge of developer evangelization for Samsung in there, who worked directly for Adam Shire, who created Siri. We had someone from Google. We had folks from Ford, the automobile manufacturer. And so what we tried to do is we have our narrative throughout the book, but then we also intersperse different industry perspectives. So whether it was trying to get the big three producers, Amazon, Google, and Samsung, folks like that, or like there's a physician that talks about healthcare applications for AI. And we try to make it as well-rounded as possible. And in addition, we have, I believe, 10 case studies in the book. So we did a deeper dive into Nike, Domino's, Starbucks, a few of the different ones that exist, and how they actually leverage the conversational AI technology to either improve customer experience, reduce costs, like whatever they're trying to do. So it was a big undertaking writing that book. And it was funny because that one was through a publisher. Our first one, which is called Voice Strategy, was self-published. And we were able to do that in about 2 months versus 3.5 years. So,
Oh man.
it's definitely, there's quality differences, but there's also speed to market and getting the information out there. Our first book was more of a strategy guide. So it's our processes, the tools, frameworks we use to do our jobs. So it was more of a like hands-on book, whereas this one is a little bit more educational, and it's a little bit more focused on the general business market. Here's what the technology can do. Here's some ways people have implemented it, and here's how you can get started. So it was a very, very big undertaking. I would not recommend writing a university level textbook. If you're going to write a business book, keep it for business professionals and don't worry about colleges. And it's just because of all the citations and the deeper research that you have to do to make it academically sound.
And did you do that from a strategy perspective? I mean, is there more revenue upside considering that it's a textbook, or what was the reason of making it a textbook?
That was actually a publisher decision. So the publisher we work with was actually the largest independent publisher in the world, and they have a very large university division. And so it's being used as a marketing textbook at various universities. I haven't seen the list lately, otherwise I'd start name dropping, but I don't want to misspeak. So, but yeah, so that was the intention. But, when Susan, my wife, and I started writing it, and we actually have 2 other co-authors of the book as well, our intention was really to help the business community figure out what this technology is and how they can start to take advantage of it. And the university aspect was just kind of a nice cherry on top, quite frankly. So, and then in support of the book, we've done, lectures at various graduate level programs in Chicago and elsewhere. And we've done a lot of public speaking just on the topic of, conversation and voice, and really what it means when your brand starts speaking with your customers and not talking to them. And so it's kind of the idea of a two-way conversation versus just shouting messages, kind of the old school way.
And is there a third book in the future?
I really hope not.
Okay.
At this point, no. We've kicked around the idea of updating voice strategy, quite frankly, because, our processes have evolved. But there's also, I think the first third of the book is probably out of date because it was 2019, I want to say. So whatever the landscape was in 2019. So that kind of upfront would need to be reworked. But we're also doing, paid writing for the National Restaurant Association and, guest blogs and things like that. So while I don't have any plans for a third book, we certainly are pretty prolific on our own blog, on our website. And there's definitely, articles on there that would be relevant to your audience. So I'd encourage people to check out pragmatic.digital and look at our blog. There's a lot of information. We've even got it broken down by retail, healthcare, restaurants, etc. So you can easily find, relevant information if you're looking for it. And it's anything from what is it to like case studies or how to go about implementing it. So again, trying to get as much information out as possible to help as many people as possible.
Very cool. And I want to shift to kind of focus on you as an entrepreneur and why you chose entrepreneurship and not more of a traditional career path. I'm just kind of curious always to pick entrepreneur's brain and, kind of what your why is and why you ended up going down this path.
It's funny. So it was 2017 when I decided to make the leap into entrepreneurship. And it was a lot of like, hey, I've seen people do this. Why not me? Especially when it comes to, the technology. Like I saw people like jump on the mobile bandwagon early and, scaled companies, whether it was apps or even agencies that were focused on mobile app development. So it just got to a point where, we're probably at that point about 20 years into our career. Like, why not us and why not now? And it just seemed like the perfect time to get involved. So like I said earlier, initially, it was a lot of just kind of like feeling our way through and doing our own education. But because we had already had professional experience in research, user experience, content strategy, like it wasn't that big of a lift for us to add a different technology because at the end of the day, a lot of the problems we're solving in one channel is directly applicable to another channel. So like if you're solving X problem on your website, it probably is also going to be something that's relevant for video content or audio content or whatever. So like we know the process, we know how to get to like what people need and what they're looking for. So for us, it wasn't a huge leap. It was just adding that technology layer on top. But ultimately that was it. I mean, it was like, I've seen this go 3 other times. This is going to be the 4th one. And if I don't do it now, I don't know if I'll ever do it. So it was like, let's jump in with both feet and kind of see what happens. And 6-ish years later, we're still here. So
do you have any regrets making the plunge? I mean, has it all been worth it? Or do you ever look back and say, oh, I wish, back to just simpler 9 to 5 life?
I mean, there's trade-offs with both, so the best way I heard it described was you give up the illusion of stability for the illusion of freedom. So stability on the corporate side, freedom on the entrepreneurial side. But what they don't tell you is, yeah, there is freedom, but it's also stressful. And so there are trade-offs. And, you, especially if you're an entrepreneur, solopreneur, small team of like 2 or 3, like you're literally sales, your marketing, your product, your engineering probably, and so there's all these roles that you have to fulfill, which is again why I'm such a big proponent of tools that help you streamline that, because like if I don't do it, my wife doesn't do it, it doesn't get done a lot of times. So like there's just kind of that component to it. So but I don't regret it, especially kind of seeing where we are in 2024 with what's going on in the world. And we've seen our son grow up and we're there and can drop him off and pick him up. And there's a lot of like benefits to it. So, but yeah, there's definitely trade-offs. And every once in a while you go, well, it would be nice to have a steady paycheck, but ... And so I don't want all the things that go along with kind of what I left. And ultimately, I'm able to help a lot more people this way. I'm also able to, in my former agency life, I'd never be able to reach out to someone at Google and say, hey, do you want to be on our book? Or reach out to someone who's in charge of digital for one of the big agency holding companies. Hey, David, do you want to be in our book? And like, yeah, like that never would have happened if I didn't do this. So when I think about, kind of where we started and where we are now, like with public speaking, our books and everything, like we've come a pretty far way. And that would never have happened had I been in a traditional 9 to 5 role.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. There are upsides to it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned all these tools, right, that are available and technology that's available to us today. So do you agree with the statement that now it's easier than ever to start a business and kind of become an entrepreneur in 2024?
I think if you get out of your own way and you focus on selling whatever it is that you're selling, yes, it is much easier in 2024 than anything else. I think a lot of people, when they're starting out on the entrepreneurial path, well, I need a company name, I need a logo, I need a website, I need all of these things, because that's what they see like other businesses doing. But the reality is you need to figure out who your audience is. You need to have an attractive offer and be able to actually help, people with whatever their challenge is. And so it's more about trying to focus on selling whatever your product, service, or whatever it is. But yeah, it's a lot easier now to do all those other things. And so like there are tools practically for everything, every aspect, whether it's, outsourcing, offshoring type stuff, SEO, content creation, logo creation. And a lot of those tools I'll still use. I'll use it for inspiration. And it's really, in my opinion, no different than, going through a design magazine and seeing 40 different logo designs. There's AI tools that I can type in the name and at least stylistically get a direction and then basically design it from there. So when it comes to the tactical execution of things, yeah, it's a lot easier to scale a business now. And I definitely think that we will see billion-dollar companies that are started with 1 to 3 to 4 people. If it hasn't happened yet, then those companies haven't started. It's coming over the next year or two. And I would say within the next 5 years, you're going to see solopreneurs that are, multiple 7, 8, 9 figures. Because these systems are going to get that good and enable you to scale at that level.
Yeah, I think it's exciting times. Maybe we can close with any advice for anybody out there listening that is considering, they want to be a solopreneur, they want to start a company. I mean, what do you recommend at the very beginning? What are those first steps they can take?
It was what I just said. So it's really focusing in on finding your audience, understanding their problems that you can actually solve, and then helping them with it. And whether you're, just have a basic landing page and you're using Twitter to promote yourself or whatever, like at the end of the day, I think a lot of places and businesses fall down by not ultimately understanding the problem that they're trying to solve for their customer or what the problems their customers actually have. especially with the idea of rapid, fail fast, rapid prototyping, etc. There's this tendency to want to create something that you think would be a good idea, and a lot of people won't talk to the audience up front. So like if you're considering a business, and there's actually a great book I'm listening to right now called, I believe it's The $1,000,000 Weekend. But he basically talks through a whole process where you don't build really anything, and you can even use PayPal to take your first few payments. But the idea is talk to your customer or people that you think would be interested, find out if it's something that you'd be interested in, and get paying customers as fast as possible. That's going to be your variables for success. Especially if you have, a 6-month runway from your existing job and you want to go full time on your side hustle. Like, being able to sell and actually having revenue come in early is going to be the differentiator, and it's going to be the difference between you succeeding and failing. So,
no, I think a lot of great advice. I think all these technologies, they make it easy, but it doesn't replace those hard business skills or the work that it's going to take to identify who your customer is, who your audience is.
And it's such a basic precept that most people either forget or ignore. But I've seen so many, like even in my professional career, like I've seen projects where we were supposed to build one thing. I knew from other research that I had done that, the audience didn't want that. So we did a little bit more research, found out what we were supposed to build was completely wrong. And they wanted something completely opposite and saved like $5 million in the process. So like that happens all the time because there's this ethos in Silicon Valley where it's fail fast and just iterate and iterate and iterate. But if you're not actually starting with the right problem, then you're iterating the wrong solution. So talk to your audience, understand what their challenges are, their pain points. That'll also give you a really good leg up in being able to create content, whether it's video, audio, written, to address those concerns and attract the right people to you. So it's really about understanding the audience and what their challenges are. And if you start there, you're going to see a lot of success.
I think that's kind of a great way to end. And I'll just say, Scott, thank you for taking the time. I enjoyed the conversation. I think we kind of established, crazy, exciting times we're living in. But to close us out, where can people find out more about you and your company?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, I'm on LinkedIn. So if you look me up, it's Scot with 1 T and last name's Westwater. Otherwise, if you go to pragmatic.digital, you can go to our blog. And then we also have something that I created. It's a checklist that we actually use with our clients. And so, if you're interested, if you go to learn.pragmatic.digital, you can actually, it's just email address and first name, but it's a little bit of a primer on AI and the things that are most relevant to marketers. And then the questions that we ask brands, like, do you have an audio brand? Do you have your audience identified? Do you know what their pain points are? It's like there's a lot of helpful information that we always take our clients through. And it's something that we just wanted to give away to folks so that they can start to evaluate like where they're at kind of with the adoption or maturity when it comes to AI. But ultimately it'll help them get started. So yeah, go to learn.pragmatic.digital, download that PDF. And there's a lot of super helpful information in there that I think your listeners will really enjoy.
Very cool. Yeah, and I'll link all that information down in the description. So
perfect.
Definitely. Thanks again. I appreciate it, Scott. Yeah, and let's stay in touch and best of luck with everything.
All right. Thanks, Connor. I really enjoyed the conversation.